Hello and welcome to Mr. Collander's maths classes. Today I'm going to take you through a bit on how to do fractions, decimals, percentages and the relationship between the three of them. And I'm going to show you a few different ways of answering questions just to demonstrate that there is not one single way of doing any of these questions. There are unlimited ways of doing these and you can do them in any way that suits you best. And I'm only going to demonstrate three different ways in each question, and like I said, if you have a different way that suits you, that works for you, then use it. And actually do please in the comment section below write about the method that you use and share it, because others might find it useful too. So first off, on the screen we have 1/2 equals 50% equals 0.5, and all of those values are the exact same. They are simply given to us in three different ways to present it as a different form, but once again being the exact same value at all times. So I always have found fractions easier myself, but you might find percentages easier and you might find decimals easier either. So it's completely up to you about which method you find easiest. And just to show you that these all equal the same, I've actually moved them around here just to show that 0.5 equals 1/2 equals 50%. It doesn't matter what order you put it in, each of those is the exact same value, just expressed in a different way. So let's jump into a question straight off. So what is 1/2 of 60? So this can be expressed in different ways, and here is the fraction form of it. 1/2 of 60, 1/2 of 60. So what this means is we divide it by the number at the bottom, which in this case is 2. So 60 divided by 2 equals 30, and normally we'd multiply it by the number on top, but any number by 1 is just that number. So 1/2 of 60 is 30, and we can see it there on the screen. And like I said, I've always found fractions to be the easiest way for me personally. So it's simply divided by the number on the bottom, multiplied by the number on the top. In this case it's 1. So I haven't bothered to write that in, but hopefully you understand that this is the case. So as you saw earlier on in the video, we said that 1/2 is 50%, and it's also the same as being 0.5. So if you do see 50% of 60, it is simply asking you to find 1/2 of 60, which is dividing 60 by 2. If you see 0.5 of 60, it's the exact same thing, so you're dividing 60 by 2, and in each case the answer always turns out to be the same. So whether you're saying 1/2 of 60 is 30, whether you're saying 50% of 60 equals 30, or whether you're saying 0.5 of 60 is 30, each of those is the exact same value, just expressed in a different way. So let's look at something a bit more difficult than simply 1/2. So we're looking at 3/5. So 3/5 is the same as saying 60%. So let's look at something a little harder. So we're going to look at 3/5 of 70. Okay, so like I said, fraction version, divide by the bottom, multiply by the top. So the question here is 3/5 of 70, 5 being the bottom number, 3 being the top. So we divide by the bottom first, so 70 divided by 5 gives me 14. I take that 14, multiply it by the top number, which is 3. 14 by 3 equals 42. So taking this method and using fractions, my answer comes up as 42. But now let's look at the percentages way. So 3/5 equals 60%. Okay, so I know this off the top of my head, but if I wanted to figure out what it was percent wise, I'd do it that 100% divided by the bottom would give me 20. So 100 divided by 5 would give me 20. Multiply by the number on top, which is 3. So 20 multiplied by 3 would give me 60. So 3/5 is the same as saying 60%. So if you recall from the last slide, we're looking for 3/5 of 70. In this case, we're now looking for 60% of 70. So 70 represents 100%. So what we're looking at here is 70 is 100%. We don't want 100%. We only want 60% of 70. So first off, we need to actually find out what 1% is. Well, if 70 is 100%, to find 1%, I simply need to divide 70 by 100. So if I divide 70 by 100, I get the answer of 0.7. So that 0.7 represents 1%. So I'm not only just looking for 1%, I'm looking for 60%. So I'm looking for 60 times that. And if I multiply 0.7 by 60, I get an answer of 42. Okay, so 60% equals 42. If you recall from the last slide, 3/5 of 70 also equals 42. So this is kind of indicating to me that I seem to be getting the correct answer, but I've used two different methods of getting there. Now the final method. So let's look at the decimal way of finding it. So 3/5 equals 0.6. Now if I wanted to figure out what 3/5 was as a decimal, well, if 1.0 is 5/5, okay, so that's the whole amount is 1.0 of something, I do the usual, divide by the bottom, multiply by the top. So 1.0 divided by 5 would give me 0.2, multiplied by the top, which is 3, so 0.2 multiplied by 3 would give me an answer of 0.6. So 3/5 equals 0.6. I'm now looking for 0.6 of 70. So 70 equals 1.0. So 70 is the full amount. So if anything is 1.0, that means it is 100%. It is 5/5, 100 hundredths, whatever way you want to call it. It all equals the same. It's all 1.0. It is the full amount, as is shown here. So 70 multiplied by 1.0 equals 70. So when you multiply anything by 1, you're going to get itself. So 70 is 1.0. It is 100%. It is 5/5. It's 100 hundredths. It is 100%. So with decimals, there's kind of there's different ways of doing it, but a nice way of doing it, and it's it's a one-step way of doing it, is simply to multiply the number by the decimal that you're looking for. So as we stated in the last slide, we're looking for 0.6. So in this case, we're going to multiply 70 by 0.6. So there's no frazzle dazzle, there is no like multiple divide by the bottom, multiply by the top. It's simply multiplied by what it is that you're actually looking for. So we're going to look at this as a long multiplication. I know that one of the numbers is 0, but let's just go with it for simplicity's sake. So we'll multiply 70 by 6, that's our first line. 6 zeros are 0, 6 sevens are 42, and there's no more numbers, so I just simply write down 42. So the first line is going to read 420. And then we move on to our next line. So I know we're multiplying by 0, so everything on this line is going to end up being 0. But in case you ever come across something being like 2.6, so you know exactly what to do here. So in this case, we're multiplying it by 0, but if it was 2.6, we'd be multiplying it by 2. So I drop my 0 at the start, so of every second line in the long multiplication. And then 0 times 0 is 0, 0 times 7 is 0. So that just gives me the answer of 0, 0, 0. And then I add those two together. 0 plus 0 is 0, 2 plus 0 is 2, 4 plus 0 is 4. Now, it might seem like we're done, but don't forget that earlier on we had a decimal point. So I have to go back up to the top. Now I do leave the decimal point until the very end. I know that doesn't seem like something we would normally do, because when we do subtraction or when we do addition, we always keep the decimal point going with us. But for multiplication, it's a lot easier to just simply do this at the end and retrace your steps. So I go back up to the top and I count how many numbers in the question are after a decimal point. And I look up here and I see that there is one number after the decimal point. In this case, it's 6. Okay, so I count up the numbers. There is simply one number after the decimal point in the question. So I take that knowledge of what was in the question and I bring it back down. So if there was one number after a decimal point in the question, in the answer there is going to simply be one number after the decimal point as well. So I come down, I find the last number, and I put a decimal point before it to make sure that in my answer there is one number behind a decimal point. Obviously with anything, having 0.0 means you can actually get rid of the 0.0 if you really want to. It doesn't add anything or take anything away from the number, so it isn't really necessary. Like with money, if you say something's 52 euros, you don't simply write down 52.00 euros. You can simply say 52 euros, so 52 with a euro symbol in front of it. But for this case, I'm just showing it for an example. So our answer in the end ends up being 42. So we saw that with fraction method, the answer came out 42. With the percentage method, the answer came out 42. And with the decimal method, our answer also came out 42. There are a billion ways you could answer these questions. These are simply 3 ways of approaching it. Remember to find out the way that suits you best and work with it. Okay, so now you're going to actually have a question here, and it's a word problem, so it's going to try and present at least one little tricky way in the question. Okay, so we really have to read the question to find out what information they give and what the question is actually looking for. So Sonia had 85 euro. She spent 40% buying rugby boots. How much had she left? Now I'm going to ask you here to pause the video and try and attempt that question, be it on a piece of paper or doing it in your maths copies or whatever you have, lined paper, whatever you want. Just pause the video, try and do it yourself. If you get the answer, great, and watch the rest of the video and see if you use the same method as myself. Or if you get stuck and you cannot find any way possible, then simply unpause this, see for a tip of what you were stuck on, and then pause again and go back to your question, or watch until the end and then retry the question yourself. Okay, so hopefully you got the answer by yourself, and let's see how you got on. Okay, so I'm going to read the question again, and I have to really figure out what they're looking for. So Sonia had 85 euro. She spent 40% buying rugby boots. How much had she left? So the question isn't asking you how much she spent. It's asking you how much she had left after buying the rugby boots. Okay, so it's looking for the change in it. Now let's look at the information they give us. So straight away I'm looking up here and I see that 85 euros is here, and I'm going to circle it here so that you know that this is information we need. Okay, so 85 euros is her starting amount. That is the 100%. That's the 1.0. That's the 100 over 100. It's the 5 over 5, 6 over 6, 10 over 10. Whatever way of a fraction you want to call it, it's 100%, and it's 1.0. So now I peruse through the question and I try to find out what other information it gives me. So she spent 40% of her money. Okay, so I can note down that she spent 40% of that. Okay, so in my head I've already noted it down. I might write it down on a piece of paper if I really want to. Whatever suits you best, whatever works for you. Okay, this is maths. There is not one simple way to do it. There's a billion different ways that suit people differently. So let's look at, obviously because this video is about fractions, decimals and percentages, let's look at 40%. So 40% is the same as saying 4 over 10. It's also the same as saying 0.4. So I'm going to start with the percentage way because the question gives us percent, so I'm going to just shoot forward and go with the percentage way. Okay, so Sonia had 85 euro, so we know now that 85 euro is 100%. So let's fire into it and try find 1%. Okay, so if 85 is 100%, that's 100 times what I'm really looking for, so I'm going to have to divide by 100 to find that 1%. 85 divided by 100, everything moves 2 spaces over to the right, so in this case it's going behind the decimal point, so 85 divided by 100 gives me 0.85. So 0.85 equals 1%. Now, am I done? No, the question's asked me for 40%, so I need 40 times that. So I get my 1%, which is 0.85, and I multiply that by 40. So to not confuse anyone or anything, I'm just going to go straight forward, law multiplication. I'm not going to confuse anything, and I'm just going to go as I would as if that wasn't a 0. So 0 times 5 is 0, 0 times 8 is 0, and 0 times 0 is 0. Shock. Now on to the 4. So obviously I've gone into my second line of law multiplication, so I dropped my first 0 there, so make sure to write the 0 first. 4 times 5 is 20. I write down my second 0 there. I bring over my 2. 4 times 8 is 32. Don't forget the 2 that you've brought over with you from before, so that becomes 34. And I've included this 0 just for the sake of the video. Normally I would not write in the 0, but I did it anyway. So 4 times that 0 is 0. So I'm going to add my two lines together. So 0 plus 0 is 0. 0 plus 0 again is 0. 0 plus 4 is 4. And then there's nothing above the 3, so I just bring down the 3. So I have an answer here of 3,400. Am I finished the answer completely? Of course I'm not, because I look back at the question and I see that there are numbers after a decimal point. This is different though from the last time, because now I actually have two numbers behind a decimal point. Okay, so I'm looking at the two numbers, and immediately I remember that I must have two numbers behind a decimal in my answer. So I get my decimal point, I go down to my answer, I move two numbers in from the right hand side, and I put the decimal point before the second last number. So in this case it's going to be 34.00. Normally, like I said, we wouldn't include the 00, so I could just simply say that the answer for this bit is 34. Okay, so we did the percentage route, so now let us look at the fraction route. So I remind myself that Sonia had 85 euros. So if we're going fractions, we can say that 85 euro is the same as saying 10 over 10, or 10 tenths. So I'm going to start off and I'm going to find out what 1/10 is. So to do so, I must divide it by 10. 85 divided by 10 is going to give me an answer of 8.5. So now I can safely say that 8.5 equals 1 over 10. So am I finished? Do I clap myself on the back? No, because remember the question wants 40%, which is the same as saying 4/10. So now we have to go through finding 4/10. So if I know what 1/10 is, I just have to multiply that by 4 to find out 4/10. So 4 times 5 is 20. I write down 0, carry my 2. 4 times 8 is 32. I add on the 2 that I carried, so I get an answer of 340. But then I got to remind myself that I'm not finished. There's a decimal point up the top. So I look back there and I see that there is one number behind the decimal point. So if there is a number behind the decimal point in my question, then in my answer I have to have the exact same numbers behind my decimal point. So in this case there's only one behind, so in my answer I only have one number behind, so my answer comes up as being 34.0. So my answer becomes 34 because I can get rid of that 0. Does that answer look familiar? But don't forget, I mean, we could have used 4/10. We could have changed that to being 2/5, and I could have done the question being dividing 85 by 5 and multiplying by 2. But I decided to keep it simple with tenths. Like I said, there is no one way. You could do it yourself any way you want. I'm just, for the video's sake, trying to keep it simple to a point. Okay, and on to our last form of finding the answer. Okay, and we're going to look at decimals. So Sonia had 85 euro. As a decimal, what does that represent? 85 equals 1.0. It is the whole amount. So if something's 1.0, it is the entire amount. But what we're looking for is 0.4, because 40% is the same as 0.4, and it's also the same as 4/10. Now, there are a lot less steps with decimals, so let's look at the one step that we have to take now. So like I said, to find a number by itself, the whole amount, you can multiply it by 1.0. So 85 by 1.0 would give me 85. But we want 0.4, so I'm going to multiply 85 by 0.4. So I go through it again. 4 times 5 is 20. I drop my 0, carry my 2. 4 times 8 is 32, plus the 2 that I'm carrying will give me an answer of 34. So my first line here is 340. And then normally I wouldn't do a second line with a 0, but for argument's sake here and the sake of the video, I will do it. So my second line of line multiplication, I write down my first 0, and then I do 0 times 5, which is 0, and 0 times 8, surprise surprise, is also 0. So I simply add them together, and hopefully I can do this now. 0 plus 0 is 0, 4 plus 0 is 4, and 3 plus 0 is 3. But as I've stated a few times in this case, and it's probably at this point being drilled into you instead of any other way, but I'm going to keep drilling it here. There was one decimal in the question, so one number after the decimal point in the question. So I take my knowledge that from earlier on in the video and I bring it to this. If there was one number after the decimal in the question, then there must be one number after the decimal in the answer. So I put a decimal point between the 4 and the 0, thereby making sure that I have one number after the decimal point, and that gives me 34.0. Does that answer look familiar? Yes, it does. And like I said, in the answer section I would never normally write 0.0. More than welcome to yourself. Put a billion zeros afterwards. It won't create any bigger or smaller of a number. It just creates more writing for yourself. So the answer is 34. So in our questions we came across there, we kept getting the same answer whilst taking 3 different methods. It's like traveling to school. There is no one way to get to school. There's the car, there's the bus, there's walking, there's running, there's cycling, there's scooting. There's a million different ways. Just like in maths, there's a million different ways. Okay, but am I finished the question? I have to really think back to what the question had asked me. So anytime you're doing word problems, I really would say, please, 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 when you think you have found the answer, go back to the question and reread the question to make sure that that is what you're looking for. So if I'm doing the question there, I might have thought to myself, okay, 34 euros the answer, I'm done. I go back to the question. Sonia had 85 euros. She spent 40% buying rugby boots. How much money had she left? When we found out 40%, we weren't finding out her change or how much she had left. We found out how much she spent. So what I need to do now is take that 34 and take it from the original amount. Okay, so 85 minus 34, Sonia was left with 51 euros. Okay, so that would be my answer. Now, as I said, these ways that I've done these questions, there is not one simple single way of doing it. I mean, I showed you how to find 40% and subtract that. I really could have looked at it as being, if 85 was 100%, she spent 40%, she could have been left with 60%. So if I wanted to, I could have actually gone out of my way to find 60% each time I did that sum, and it would have saved me this last step. So I could have found what 3/5 was, I could have found out 60%, and I could have found out 0.6. But for the sake of the video, I thought I'd go through the steps as straightforward and transparent as I could. Remember, there is not one way to simply do this. There's loads of ways. So I'm going to actually leave you with 3 questions here. Okay, so question 1, question 2, and question 3. And I'd like if you could possibly write your answers in the comments below. If for some reason someone else has commented an answer, please don't read them first and then do them. Okay, so, but you can use them maybe as a reference afterwards. If they have a different answer, perhaps you can look back in yours and see if they perhaps made a mistake or if you made a mistake. It's a good way to check without having to wait for a response from myself. Okay, so the question 1, Andy had 12 euros. He spent 0.7 of it. He did not spend 70 cents. He spent 0.7 of 12 euro. How much did he spend? Question 2, Man City lost 28 over 100. So the fraction is 28 over 100, or 28 hundredths, of their 50 matches. So they played 50. They lost 28 over 100 of those. How many matches did they win? So be careful with that question. And question 3, Nadal had 42 tennis balls. He lost 25% of them. How many did he have left? Okay, once again, be careful what they ask how many did he have left? And notice in those 3 questions, I have presented them in a way that one of them is presented asking as decimal, another one is fraction, and the other one's percent. You do not have to follow the percent, decimal, or fraction to each of these. Do whatever way suits you best. Figure out the equivalent decimal, fraction, or percentage and work it out yourself. Okay? If you get stuck, please rewind over the video over the methods I'd shown before, and maybe they can help you to figure out what way works best for you. So if you'd like, you can write your answers in the comments below. You can like and subscribe the video as well if you really like to. And if you need any help, please write them in the comment section and I'll do my best as well.